I have here another engineer test for you. Now, recently I was looking through TM 5-280 foreign mine warfare equipment from 1963, looking up information on old Soviet landmines. And inside there, they have a chapter on Soviet tactics from World War II. They had that in there so that NATO troops, especially US troops, would have an idea on what the Soviet Army did with their minefield doctrine in their last conflict in the 1940s. Now inside there, I came across something that I'm giving the name a Soviet World War II intersection minefield obstacle. Now the guidance that was in there on this wasn't a hell of a lot. It had the picture in there, and that's what I came across. Got me interested. I read through the chapter. Tried to find as much detail as I could about this setup. And all they had in there was this. Anti-tank mines were laid at highway crossings in conjunction with large charges that, when camouflaged, had an annihilating effect. That's all there was. Now the basic layout on this here is the main road, and this would be, you know, a little trail, smaller road going off to the side. Remember, this is World War II, Soviet Union. Most of the country is still extremely undeveloped, so their roads back then were dirt. Except when they got wet, they turned into lakes of mud, and they still do reportedly today in areas that don't have paved roads. So they didn't have to worry about trying to punch through asphalt or concrete to put their mines in. It's a regular dirt road. It wasn't even packed gravel. So we had the intersection here. The enemy's up here, moving this direction, moving towards the bottom. This line here is the IEDs, the bulk explosive charges, to give that extra punch. At an angle going across the roadway here, from one corner to the other, is anti-tank mines. And most likely, I came across information, reading in stuff, these were meant to be low metallic anti-tank mines, so wooden mines, but they used whatever was available. These mines were spaced between 1 to up to 5 meters between mines. It didn't really matter to them if they ended up with sympathetic detonation, because when this whole thing went off, it destroyed this entire intersection. Ideally, this type of obstacle would be done inside a forest, so you'd have close trees here, close trees here, same over here, over here. This area would be too thick for tanks and trucks to move through without the engineers cutting a bypass through all those thick trees and then bulldozing it out, making it smooth enough that that traffic can go around the obstacle. I did find information that when it was possible, if the trees were not so close to the road, Soviet doctrine stated that that space between the roadway and the tree line would be filled with anti-personnel mines. And the mines in particular that they would put in were primarily Palm Z's stake mines. The reason for that, the greater likelihood that the enemy soldier, in this case Wehrmacht soldiers, would set the mine off. They wouldn't just step over the top of it if it was a pressure mine, along the lines of a PMD-6. So the sides of the road here, probably going back to where these charges are, this area up in here, up in here, up in here, up in here, would be filled with anti-personnel mines to try to stop the enemy soldiers from going around. Especially those enemy sappers who are trying to find how deep this minefield is, or this obstacle is. Now the mines and the bulk charges were connected by det cord. So this mine at this point, it had branch lines coming off of it going to this bulk charge and to that bulk charge. Same for this one over here. The ones in the center, those would be tied in to the bulk charges in the center, according to the drawing. So that when a single mine would be detonated in any location, that fire train is going to shoot down the det cord going to the bulk charges, which are all tied together, setting those charges off one after another, and that would also set off the other mines inside the roadblock, trying to create a road crater, or at least make it so rough in there the enemy engineers are going to have to spend a considerable amount of time repairing it before they can continue forward. And that gives the partisans that are in the area or artillery observers over watching the obstacle potentially more time that they can call for an indirect fire mission to get dropped on the convoy or assault that's back here behind the obstacle, holding them there longer. Now, it did say in there that when the Russians tried putting in roadblocks on roadways with mines, they did try to separate those minefields by at least 100 meters. So you'd have another obstacle potentially like this at another intersection at least 100 meters down the road, or it could be a series of mines laid across the road, and maybe I'll do a video on that one. They have a description on that type of obstacle too, how they used to lay out anti-tank minefields on roadways on stretches where there was no turnoff. Maybe that's one to do also. There was a note that the Soviets were very meticulous on their minefield records, almost as meticulous as the German military. So every single obstacle, you had it mapped out. And that map and the chart of the minefield was sent to Higher for archiving, for use for removing that obstacle later, either as the Russian forces are assaulting forward and are now recapturing territory and they got to clear these minefields so that their troops can go through, or when the war is over and they got to go through and clear those mines so that the civilians don't have to deal with them. Cut down on the danger to them. According to the manual 5-280, the Soviet doctrine was you had to have, for every minefield, 2 landmarks that could be located on a standard map sheet to assist with locating where the obstacle is at. Those were your primary landmarks. And then you had 2 secondary landmarks, which were something in that area. So it could be a giant, huge boulder, or it could be a particular landmark there, a particular building, intersection corners, that type of thing. So that you could locate the general area on the map from 2 landmarks there, to line that up when you're on the ground, and then when you're trying to locate exactly where the mines are, you have 2 intermediate landmarks that had an azimuth and distance going to where the mine started, and then you had your azimuth and distance between each mine so that you could locate every single mine. And reportedly their map sheets did show every mine that was emplaced, every explosive charge, every booby trap. So whatever additional mines or booby traps were put in around this to protect it, those were on the same map for this. The only exceptions to that was if the Soviet Sappers are under fire by enemy troops then it was allowed to, just get those mines out there to slow the enemy. You didn't have to map them, at least not as accurately as a pre-planned obstacle. Now, when I was going through looking at this, it occurred to me that this is kind of basic, isn't it? And you're just taking out this area here, trying to create a road crater. And it occurred to me that I had recently done a video on something called the OZM-UVK mine or engineering device. Something like that was probably incorporated into this also. So we keep our charges down here, which are on the friendly side, but maybe up here we do something a little different. Maybe instead of just putting bulk charges, maybe we will have one in here that's a little bit farther back. And then maybe instead of having a bulk charge here, what if we do something different? Like further back from this, we put in those OZMs. So then in the center here, this would still be tied into these mines, and then this mine here, tied in by det cord. Det cord going to the OZMs on this side, and then over here, we could potentially, go mine to mine instead of charge to mine. And we still do the same thing over here. So in this situation, we have the enemy vehicles move up, and they're in combat spacing, whatever their preset distance is. So we probably got a couple tanks, and then we have the engineers in here in a truck or a half track. We got our 50 meters distance or whatever it is between vehicles. This one comes up, hits one of these mines here in the center. This goes off potentially underneath this tank here, the number 2, because this is in the intersection. And then behind this one, spaced out combat spacing, we have these OZM UVKs going off back here, tossing up those artillery rounds out of the ground, going off a second later within the vicinity of the lighter skinned vehicles. And then just to make sure, if we get engineers that would come forward and that stuff, set the stuff off. We also have some up in here too on this side to assist with that. And then we still got the bulk charges past the point of initiation to help increase or create a giant road crater here. That would essentially look like that after it would blow up. I got a feeling that's something that they probably did too. They used whatever was available. There was a note on that, on their obstacles, especially stuff like this. They used what was available. They would use artillery shells. They would use whatever mines were available. They would use whatever bulk explosives. Maybe this charge up in here, maybe it's not bulk explosives. What if it's a smaller aerial bomb? A piece of unexploded ordnance. Instead of destroying it, they took that bomb that was dropped by a German Stuka dive bomber, dug a hole in the road, put a couple charges on it, tied it in with det cord, and made that the bulk charge in here, used that bomb against the advancing German troops. All they did was disable the primary fuse. so that it wouldn't go off as they're trying to set it up. Things to think about, isn't it? Ways to put in a minefield at an intersection to slow the advance of the enemy troops, and then at the same time, if the enemy sets it off, still creating a larger obstacle. And it's very likely that at least one of these mines in here will have an anti-handling device. So if this obstacle is located by the German engineers, they start clearing these mines to clear the path. Most of the mines will not have an anti-handling device. They're trying to move through there quickly. They miss it on the one mine. They start pulling that mine out of the ground. It detonates and still sets off the obstacle because everything is tied together with det cord. Interesting tactic, something you can definitely war game out on how to expand this out to create this as a more complex obstacle, more devastating obstacle on the enemy. I do want to mention there were notes that the Soviets did pre-set up minefields behind their lines, especially earlier in the war. If they had an obstacle like this, it said in roadways, that one of the things they would do is they would dig holes large enough for the mines, and then they would stack blocks of wood in there and then cover it with dirt. So the holes were pre-dug. When the order came in to emplace the obstacle at this time, they just had to go up there, locate where those pre-dug holes are, uncover those blocks of wood, pull them out of the hole, toss them in the back of the truck or toss them farther into the woods, whatever it is, put the mines in the hole, do what needed to be done, camouflage them. The obstacle was then ready. Taking an obstacle that could take 2 hours, maybe an hour to 2 hours to emplace, bring it down to maybe 15 to 30 minutes depending on the number of sappers you have and the numbers of mines that have to be in place and how complex of an obstacle you're putting into the location. So there you go, an engineer tactic from World War II, a Soviet World War II intersection mine